Hey YouTube, Mike the Alpha Hoarder here. Glad you found me stumbling through the halls of YouTube. It's been a minute, and I wanted to talk a little bit about that today. I changed my playmat because I think this is a more apt metaphor for today's video and for how I'm feeling. I can relate to this guy right here. But anyway, I am still around. Those of you who are worried. I'm still planning on making videos, but a couple things have changed, I think. And I just want to get into that a little bit. And I'll work through my ever-growing backlog of packages. This one isn't that old, but I have some going back to November at this point. So anyway, where have I been? Well, first of all, work's been pretty crazy. This particular economy is putting pressures on my businesses that the likes of which I just haven't seen in many years. I've been grinding like I did in the old days. And I'm a little older now. I have kids now. It's tougher now, but it is what it is. What are you going to do? There are two bigger factors that are contributing to my frequent absence. And those are related to MTG itself. The first one is Burnout. I talked about that in my most recent video, which is, months ago, I guess. Whenever that was. But I've gone through a very strange arc with Magic 30. I went from initially absolutely detesting the product, speaking out against Hasbro's decision making. Then I went to sort of feeling like many people did, just completely inundated by everybody talking about it, to the point that I just needed to clear my head and get away a bit. I started tuning out from a lot of the MTG channels that I've always loved. Some nice pickups today, a couple of dual lands I've been eager to get a hold of. You know, not gem mint, but nice condition, for sure. I'll crack both of these out. Always after nice willows. Good old aspect. I think all of these will get cracked out. Awesome start, though. I do still love doing this. But yeah, I started tuning out of a lot of the channels that I was watching, and then I kind of went through a little phase where I was trying to reconcile with the Magic 30 cards, I guess, or at least I was trying to make sense of the hobby that now contains them. That didn't really help me reset. I bought a few collections. I've sort of just been spending a little bit more time with the cards and sorting things. And I don't know. At this point, I actually don't think it's just me. Part of it obviously is, but I think that there have been some fundamental changes in the landscape, in the hobby, in the collecting and MTG Finance side of the hobby. I think that some fundamentals have changed, and I think those changes are important. What do we got here? ABU games. Oh, nice. A couple of Earthbinds. Don't even remember buying this. What is this from? October 2022. Yikes. Well, like I said, I got a backlog. October. Is that right when Rudy was pumping these? Or was that right before? Nice ones. So here's the thing. I've never been a hype channel, you know, at least I've tried not to be. I'm just a dude, worked my ass off, managed to scrape up some disposable income, and then I wanted to share the collection that I was putting together as a result of that. And the finance side, it's important to me because it interests me. You know, I find these markets fascinating. It's not important to me because I'm trying to sell. I've never sold anything. I barely even trade. So I'm not in a position where I'm trying to sell you or anybody anything, where I have to worry about what the sentiment might be. I just buy stuff I love, I share it, and that's that. But the finance is something that I've always engaged with. And the main reason is because the finance side is the engine that makes all this collecting possible. Ooh, that's a beautiful one. Look at those edges and corners. Little warping down here. Pretty minor. Beautiful Lord of Atlantis. I mean, why the hell would somebody have enough capital to buy a house tied up in little pieces of cardboard if those pieces of cardboard were worthless? You know what I mean? That's why the finance side is really important to me. That's what it really comes down to. I'm not that much of a high roller on the level where owning something like this just because I love it makes any sense. I just couldn't do that. You know, I'm sure there are people that can. But the reason I can do this, the reason I can have these and enjoy them and get the awesome privilege of holding them and looking at them and, you know, getting lost in the artwork and nostalgia. I mean, the reason that this is an option is because this isn't lost money. This isn't money that I just threw away. Now, to be clear, it is a lost opportunity cost. I've made a couple of videos about that. I think that's an important thing to understand. It is a loss of liquidity, and it is highly risky. Ooh, a jump for the Horde. You can never have enough jumps, folks. Just remember that. So, you know, buying into this stuff, it's not free or even money generating necessarily. But at the end of the day, it so happens that I can afford the costs represented by the opportunity cost and the lack of liquidity. I'm okay with those particular losses and risks, and I'm willing to gamble that against the likelihood that those cards, you know, will appreciate in value over time, or at least won't go to zero. And so I did. That's what I've been doing for some time now. But that was all pre-Magic 30. Now it seems to me that the formula has changed in a couple of ways. One of them is specific to me. Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Let's compare the PSA 7 to the BGS 7. Nice couple of cards. I think the PSA one looks nicer. This has more obvious edge and corner wear. Not every day I open up dual lands, though. What was I saying? Right. So there's a couple of things that have shifted. One of them has to do with me. So, you know, I can't blame that on Magic 30. But when I sort of got into purchasing cards at scale and at volume, I set goals for myself pretty early on relating to the percentage of my net worth that I was willing to have in the form of cardboard. It was a diversification move, that is true. But, you know, the caveat are all the things that I, sort of just said before about the various intangible costs associated with doing this, and the fact that I never had the goal or, intention of seeing an ROI that I could compare to, say, the stock market or something like that. So yeah, it was a diversification move, but again, the finance side is really just to power the ability to collect, to make it practical. I pretty much reached those accumulation goals in late 2022. I still have a couple of things I'm trying to do, but for the most part, most of the goals I laid out, I completed. A couple of them I overshot. I am a collector first, so every now and then some purely discretionary decisions slip in. So there is that. That is one reason that I'm feeling a little distance. But the second one is general to the hobby, and I think it's a big deal. So, in my opinion, the speculative side of parking money into cards like this has shifted. My risk analysis is dramatically different than it used to be. We are firing on all cylinders today, folks. Part of that's just because it's been so long since I made a video. I made sure to grab a couple of rares that have been sitting here on my desk that I've been eager to open. Ooh, I love the lady. Let's take a look at this. Definitely a played card. Look at that centering right left. Phew. Beautiful nonetheless. A little bit of warping, some edge wear. No ink. Good old doppelganger. One of my favorites. So my very first video on this channel was a warning that this stuff is quite speculative. And that's a polite way of saying that it's gambling, right? Like when you buy a card or a box, you are wagering both the market value that you're spending and the opportunity cost of that product. That's your wager in return for holding them. And they could appreciate in value. They could trend sideways. They could crash. And everything in between, right? I've always said these could go to zero and I'd be okay. And that's true. And that's why I'm not selling anything. Because I don't really care if I have to ride them to zero. I love them. I want them. I'll always feel that way. But I didn't buy them with the expectation that they'd go to zero, right? I didn't buy them thinking that was the most likely outcome. What I thought was that is one fairly unlikely outcome on a map of many possible outcomes. It's one that I'd considered, and I was okay with it. I would say that on the distribution curve of what I expected out of this hobby in the long run, I think it probably centers around maybe a single-digit % negative return over a long run of, say, 20, 30 years to a single-digit positive return over a long run, positive % return over a long run. That would sort of be where I had centered my distribution curve, and I was okay with that. And of course, there would be outliers to one side and outliers to the other side. And again, that's what a personal risk analysis is about. Are you comfortable rolling the dice into that distribution curve as you see it, based on what you think is or isn't likely? And that was my sort of range for possible outcomes, sort of single digit, plus or minus either way. That seemed the most likely outcome. And I'm okay with that. I'm okay with, the likelihood of losing or gaining not that much compared to, say, the market or whatever. A smaller opportunity of a big return and a smaller risk of a total loss. I'm okay with that. That's, I'm not doing this to make money. I'd love to not lose money, is what it is. And that's where personal risk tolerance comes in. What do you want out of this hobby? What are the probabilities of the different outcomes? And how much are you willing to gamble on your assessment? On you, being right or close enough to right? Well, I gotta say, I think the math on all of that has changed in a non-trivial way and in an irreversible way. And in a way that, for me, now makes some of this stuff unfavorable, in terms of the risk-reward gamble that I think we're now making. By continuing to buy into the hobby. Now, I just want to be clear, because saying something like that is easy to misinterpret. This is all about probabilities and your willingness to speculate on the risky outcomes of those probabilities. Let's take Bitcoin as an example, just because it's a little bit simpler. It's fewer dimensions. So there was a very long time where I was basically telling anybody that would listen to buy Bitcoin. Starting from when it was around maybe, $1,200 is probably when I first started actively trying to get other people to notice this thing and get in on it. All the way up to when it was $10,000. And that's because it seemed to me, based on the adoption landscape at that time, the regulatory environment at that time, it was a pretty safe bet that it was going to go up. Nothing's ever a certainty, but the likelihoods where it failed in those days just didn't really seem to be there. And so, I would tell people to buy Bitcoin. If you jump to today, I am not advising anyone to buy Bitcoin ever. Now, that's not because I don't think it could hit 100K in 2 years, say. I think that's totally possible. And people could see, 400% returns if that happens and they buy in today. And that's a hell of an opportunity, to miss out on, right? But with today's landscape, the saturation in the space, the penetration into the market, the hype cycles that we've seen, the scams, the SEC. To me, it feels more like a 50-50 proposition. So, 50% chance, say, that it is 100K in 2 years. And 50% chance that it is 4K in 2 years. Absolutely, I think that's possible. And so, I wouldn't recommend that to somebody because I don't recommend... I don't think it's worth advising people based on a coin flip. It's that's risky gambling is what that is. And look, do it all you like. I certainly do. I still hold Bitcoin. But I don't advise people to do it as though it were a smart decision. And I don't expose myself to a position that I wouldn't be willing to put on a roulette table. And that's the situation with Magic. I don't know if that actually clarified or not, but I'm trying to call attention to the distinction between not advising someone to buy into something is not the same as saying that it doesn't have upside potential. I guess that's what I'm trying to say. And with Bitcoin, I gave those two examples. The same is the case here. I feel it is perfectly possible for the hobby to recover, for sentiment to reset, and for things to go back to the way they were. The buyouts resuming and money sort of being comfortably parked in old cards and all that stuff. In fact, for vintage cards like Alpha, certainly for some of the staples of the hobby, I would say that that's even likely. But I no longer think that the historical circumstances of the last 30 years are necessarily indicative of the next 30 years, post-Magic 30. And that's what's changed. Prior to that, there wasn't any particular reason that I could have put my finger on that would suggest that what's to come might be different than what already happened. And so we could look to the past to inform our decisions and as an indicator of how the market has evolved, has matured, and will continue to do so. I no longer feel that you can do that. As a consequence, I feel that this is much closer to a coin flip. Yeah, guess what? If you bet on a coin flip, you'll make a lot of money sometimes. About half the time, in fact. Ooh, 2 jumps. And so this could very well still be an excellent buying opportunity. The inventory continues to just be insane on all of these cards. You pick the rare that you want. Any of them. They're all out there right now. I can't even keep track. And the prices are down. And so yeah, it could be an excellent buying opportunity. But the risk end of that speculation has increased substantially. Because whereas in the past, I think we could look at the trajectory of the market over the previous 30 years. I have that one question that lingers about this generational handoff, which I want to, get back to here. But outside of that, really, you could see the direction things were going. You could see condition rarity manifesting itself in the market. You could see the markets maturing. You were taking on risk, of course, but it didn't feel anywhere near as high as it feels now. I now put this, I would say that it is likely, in the very technical sense, of above 50% that this stuff will recover. But it's damn close. It's damn close to 50%, which means your risk of catastrophic failure is also close to that number. So let's take that apart a little bit, tell you why I've been thinking along those lines. And as always, I'll be pretty eager to hear what you think about it. Beautiful table today. Look at all these cards. Okay, so this generational handoff is this thing I talk about. It's this idea that eventually the original Magic players need to hand off the passion, the nostalgia, the interest in the old art, the old cards, the lore, all this stuff in the collecting. That needs to be handed off to a new set of people who never grew up with, the Alpha artwork. And yet, this new generation grows to appreciate it. If that doesn't happen, the market ultimately dies. This is the fate of many pop culture collectible markets. They fail to make that leap. They lose relevance. And that's that. And the main way a handoff of this kind of thing happens is, well, there's a few ways, I guess. Parents bringing their kids in is one way. Social media avenues, such as myself, channels like mine that are sort of exposing people to these cards, giving them an opportunity to share in the passion and to understand the nostalgia and the history. I mean, those things can be sort of taught and handed off in that way. The major way is by the game gaining popularity in a way that still values old cards, that still has a place, still incentivizes people to seek, old staples of the game. This is what the reserve list, one thing the reserve list does, by the way, is it creates a reason to have interest in the old cards, an appreciation for the old frames and the old abilities, and, ooh, look at that. Some of these Silver Age cards like Gaia's Cradle and all that. Magic 30 kind of broke every piece of that. Now, it's really only one item on the list of the various ways Hasbro is trying to pillage the secondary market at the expense of the game. But it was sort of the tipping point, the breaking point. The secondary market, like it or not, is a absolutely critical part of the fabric of the game. The ecosystem between collectors and players, investors and dealers, the cycles that individual people make between those different roles in the course of their career, that ecosystem makes the game possible. It creates liquidity for all cards. High-end cards enable a platform like TCG Player to exist, which creates accessibility to the game for all the cheap cards too. The ecosystem gives even modern collections, forget about a collection like mine. If you played the game, 6-7 years ago, the fact that those cards could be more valuable when you come back to the game or even just over time is important, because it allows people to stay in the game without just turning it into this subscription of just constantly spending money that immediately goes to zero. Hold on. These are the factors that give the game longevity. And it's just all breaking. I'm talking about, insane power creep, which makes not that old collections at risk of being worthless. Whoa. Hold on a second. I'm talking about secret layers, which pillage secondary market prices, directly. That is basically direct to secondary market. Serialized cards, which just endlessly dilute the concept of chase cards. Now we've got the One Ring. This establishes a world in which manufactured scarcity is a priority over historical scarcity. I'm talking about Magic 30, which sacrifices the foundation of valuing old cards on the reserved list. At the same time, it legitimizes proxy use for many, many players who were against that idea for a long time. We have this pattern now spanning for years with a fairly clear goal, which is to undermine long-term collection value in order for wizards to be the beneficiaries of that value rather than the secondary market. Reprint everything, even from the reserve list. Constantly one-up every special treatment, even revisiting old borders. They just pulled the Kaladesh Inventions border back out of the graveyard and used it. I love Cyclopean Tomb. Missing the casting cost, one of my favorite errors in the set. And then there's this mentality of rushing players into cycles of FOMO by releasing sets back to back so quickly. Prioritizing this FOMO cycle over letting someone build actual nostalgia and love for cards and for the game. If you take all of this and you couple it with the exodus of vintage players and collectors, who are carrying the proverbial torch and are now burned out or selling out or just otherwise disengaging, it makes predicting the future very difficult. It makes it very, very hard to say exactly by what mechanism this generational handoff can take place. Prior to Magic 30, this market was approaching maturity. It was not a mature market, but it had been around for 30 years. There was lots of data. The grading pop reports were fairly developed. Print run details have been studied for many years and derived and understood, and liquidity and the depth of the market and all this stuff has been. Why is that green? Oh, the signature, right? Unwitnessed signature. I hope it's not green because of ink. Hold on a second. Unwitnessed signature. Good. Phew. I've done that before. I've bought the green label without realizing it. Love Brain Geyser. Surface 6.5. Must have a gouge in it somewhere. Or a bend. Yeah, I'll find it when I crack it out. What was I saying? Right, so the market was approaching maturity. And new participants in the hobby saw it as investable, among other things. And this shakeup has changed the balance in that formula. And the question is, will it stabilize back to the equilibrium that it was in before and allow business as usual? And my answer to that is maybe. Like I said, I would say probably in the technical sense, right? I would say more than 50% likely. But I can't give it much more than that, not from where we're sitting today. Not with 8 months of continuous inventory dumps. Kid Icarus just dropped a day or two ago, another nearly complete graded alpha set. Not with the endless anecdotes of people going to their LGS and just no one's playing Magic anymore. I mean, nobody knows, of course, and I don't know. But I can no longer say with confidence what's the case. I have to be more conservative than that. I'm putting it in the, mid 50%. This guy's a little warped. But that puts the alternative in the high 40%. You know, will these changes ultimately doom the hobby? Might it be the case that 2021 was the peak, followed by a crash, and followed by a slow descent into irrelevance? I don't know. Maybe. I certainly can't say that that is a low possibility, like I would have said to you at one time. And for me, that's the issue. For me, that's the issue that's shifted. And it's going to be some time before we know which direction we're going and which path we're on. This stuff was always speculative. You know, a few pieces like these. Stuff like this is going to be pretty well insulated no matter what. And that's just due to the incredible supply imbalance. You know, how many people do you need in the hobby for these cards to be incredibly valuable? But is the same true for a card like this? It's a rare. It's a nice condition alpha rare. It's only 1,008 of them. But the insulation does not spread as far as you might think. I would say things like Alpha Commons, all of the Dark, most of Antiquities and Legends, Silver Age sealed stuff and staples. All of those things are now much riskier assets. I would say they're riskier now than they've been in the last 25 years. You know, back when the market was just figuring itself out and no one knew if there would be any long-term stability. We're back in the period of great uncertainty. And that's not a formula I can personally work with. My personal risk tolerances just aren't comfortable with that. And as a consequence, I have almost entirely stopped buying. I mean, again, this is misleading. A bunch of these are from October, November, December of last year. Literally behind me, there's a pile of packages that are just sitting there waiting to be opened on camera. I've just almost entirely stopped buying. Now, not entirely. You know, I have been approached with a few collection deals. I've closed a few of those deals, you know, that seemed numerically appropriate. I still grab some things that the collector side of me just loves. You know, I don't see myself ever not buying doppelgangers if I can get them at a reasonable price. And I'm not selling anything, you know. I don't see any need to. I'm not worried enough. The risk isn't high enough that I feel like I'm in imminent danger of losing, you know, the money that is tied up in these things. But I sure don't blame you if you're selling. And, you know, yeah, that's where I'm at. So this is not a hype channel. It's also not a FUD channel. You know, I don't want it to be anyway. But these feelings that I'm trying sort of poorly to articulate are definitely one of the things preventing me from making regular videos and regular content, because I don't want to come on here and just sort of be a downer and be constantly reminding everybody to recalibrate their risk tolerances and to think through, you know, the opportunity costs. That's obviously important to do, but it's not really what collecting is about for me, and so I don't want to harp on about it. But it's very much on my mind, and so I've just had a little trouble making content that doesn't sort of get bogged down and all that. But I will definitely still be here. I still have things that I want to share on my list. I'm finding it a little hard to get those moments these days. But anyway, that's what I've got for today. I would be really curious to hear your own analysis of the potential outcomes. You know, given where the hobby is right now, the changes, the cracks that have appeared in what was a fairly stable model, inevitably will cause the balance to land in a different orientation. And we have to ask ourselves, what are the new outcomes that we're looking at? And what probabilities do you give, those different ways that things could play out? How much do you still use the previous 30 years as a metric for the next 30? Rudy seems very confident that this is just another bump in the road. We've seen plenty of bumps. He doesn't think there are any indicators that now is different than before. Maybe he's right. Or do you feel sort of more like I feel, that we are seeing fundamental changes in the market, and those fundamental changes don't necessarily signal, any kind of end. All they signal is a change. And when things change, outcomes become unpredictable for a time. And right now, I feel like we're sitting right at that moment of change. And it becomes anyone's guess exactly how it shakes out. It may shake itself out just fine. It may not. So anyway, I'm really looking forward to your comments on this. And close out. Let's just take a look one more time at the hits today. Some beautiful dual lands. Cannot beat black border duels, in my humble opinion. The color is a tad richer, I think, in the beta, but those big rounded corners in the alpha, it's just unparalleled. Brain Geyser is a favorite of mine. Will-o'-the-Wisp. I do love my Contracts and my Cyclopeans. Well, this is what it's about right here. So, all that other stuff is noise. For me, this is what it's about. All right. Thanks again. Glad you came by, even though I've been so long dormant. See you next time. Thanks for watching today's video. If you're enjoying my content, then I'd really appreciate it if you could take a moment to ponder the philosophical implications of like buttons and deliver a treatise on the social and mental health ramifications of reducing human experiences into a single binary gesture of a fist with a protruded thumb, up or down. See you next time.